Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Get your free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 6. Hey everybody, today we are joined by Pastor Zickler of Grace Lutheran Church in Western Springs, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Alrighty, Pastor Zickler, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you've come to be where you are now.
I'm originally from the Indianapolis area, a town called Fishers, which is was kind of a small farm town when I was growing up, and now is a big suburb of Indianapolis. So grew up there, went to Indiana University, and majored in real estate finance there, and then about halfway through my junior year, decided I wanted to go into the ministry. So finished my real estate degree and then worked for about 3 years at a mortgage company, which was right at the peak of the big mortgage boom in the early 2000s. And then moved to Fort Wayne to go to seminary in 2006 and vicared in Seattle, Washington at Messiah Lutheran Church in Seattle. And then went back to finish my master's in divinity. Ended up staying another year to work on what's called a Master's of Sacred Theology, and then took my first call to a parish, and that was in 2011, St. Paul Lutheran Church in Oak Lawn, Illinois. So a suburb on the southwest side of Chicago there, kind of a nearer suburb. And then in 2014, I received the call to Grace Lutheran Church in Western Springs, which is where I currently serve, and I've been there for the past 5 years. And it's a great pleasure to serve there. And we're a congregation of about 150 members. We got about 80 or so on a Sunday, but it's a great joy to serve the saints there, and a huge blessing to me.
Excellent. So help orient us a little bit. Now, what district are you in, and what exactly part of Chicago are you in?
Sure, I'm in the Northern Illinois district, so that's basically the northern third of Illinois, and most of our congregations are in the Chicago area. The portion of Chicago that I'm in is the western suburbs, and it is kind of nearer western, but it's not western suburbs. It's not right on the edge of Chicago, but it's also not, for example, as far out as some of the further ones like Naperville or even Aurora's way further out there, but we're kind of Western Springs is tucked between the towns of Hinsdale and LaGrange, and a lot of people haven't heard of Western Springs, but they've heard of those, or maybe Oak Brook. We're not too far from Oak Brook either.
I see. So tell us a little bit more about what you like and what you don't like about the area. Let's start with what you like and how it compares with some of the other places you've been.
I actually like Chicago more than I thought I would. When I was coming out of seminary, I knew I didn't want to be in a small town, but when I was called to the Chicago area, I kind of thought that's a really big city, and I wasn't sure how much I would like that. Big cities have a lot of traffic that goes along with that. Thankfully, I live in a parsonage right next to the church, so my commute's about 30 seconds.
That's a great commute.
Right? So I like that. I like my commute. As a whole, we really like being in the Chicago area. There's so many great things here, the museums and opportunities for basically anything, because it's such a big city. There's almost anything you could ask for here. So we really like having all those things, within a relatively short drive. So that's probably our favorite thing, is to have access to almost anything you could want.
So just that big city atmosphere that really affords you the opportunities to do unique and interesting things, like going to those museums, going to those concerts, that kind of thing?
That kind of thing, yeah.
All right, excellent. So what would you say that you get in Chicago that you might not get in maybe another big city? Seattle isn't as big as Chicago, but how would you contrast it with your time in Seattle, for example?
I think the thing I appreciate about Chicago in contrast to Seattle is that it's still Midwestern, For example, when I would run in Seattle, I being a Midwesterner, my instinct is to nod and smile and wave to people. And in Seattle, they would look at me like I was crazy, like I was probably stalking, So I'm sure you can appreciate that.
Yes, I can. Although as a Seattle native, I perhaps don't appreciate as much as the contrast as much as you do.
Right, I probably noticed it a little bit more. But yeah, that's something I really like is is here you still get a little bit more of the Midwestern warmth, I think, and friendliness and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things I appreciate is even though it's such a big city, I feel like it's a friendlier city than some other big cities can be.
That makes sense. So let's transition a little bit to maybe the not so great parts of Chicago. What would you say are like some of the this isn't so great about being in this area?
Traffic.
Okay.
Traffic basically pauses from about 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock. And if you want to go somewhere during the day, that's the time to go. Otherwise, if you're going anywhere that's toward the city or major thoroughfares, yeah, you're going to hit traffic. So that's that part we don't like so much. One of the things that's also harder, and this isn't Chicago per se, although it connects to being in Chicago, the regulations of the state in terms of some of the political things, especially with abortion and that kind of thing, that's abortion is so unregulated here in so many ways. For example, when you're driving out of Missouri now, because Missouri has created an environment where there are so few abortion clinics, they actually have a sign that says "Welcome to Illinois," where you can have a safe, legal abortion.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. So they're advertising being in the state for that reason. That's disheartening. It's hard to kind of stomach stuff like that.
So let me talk about one of the stereotypes that some people might have about Chicago, and then why don't you tell us a little bit about if that actually is a thing, and if it is, how much it affects you.
Okay.
One of the things when I think about Chicago, I think of that corrupt politics. Does that affect you or your church much, besides what we've already talked about?
So far, I don't notice it affecting the church all that much. I think for the people that are actually, because I'm not in the Chicago city limits, I'm in Cook County, which is the county where Chicago is, but I'm not actually in Chicago. So I think
Okay.
those churches maybe feel that a little bit more. Thankfully, we have pretty wide berth. I mean, it's not like I feel like there's somebody spying on my congregation to catch us in some kind of tax issue or something like that.
Okay.
So that part's good. But I think the way that the abortion law went through, to kind of piggyback on what I was saying, was totally an example of that. It had been in a committee, and there had been such an outcry with the law as it was in the committee from the pro-life groups that it got pushed off the table, and then they subtly sent it over to another committee, and then announced it with the absolute minimum time, which was like an hour, and then pushed it through on the night before Memorial Day.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was really, I thought it was really underhanded and dishonest.
That is shocking.
Yeah, yeah. So, here the voice of the people had been heard, and they acknowledged that by taking it off the table and then slid it somewhere where they could just push it through. And, to me, that so doesn't represent the will of the people.
Yeah. So let's transition a little bit to a new subject. What's it like raising a family in the Chicago suburbs?
The community that we're in is actually, it's a really family-oriented community. So that's really nice. And I think that in a lot of ways, Chicago land as a whole has enough of that culture still there. There's a very heavy Roman Catholic population in the city, so that kind of helped maintain some of that. So with that, I think it's a especially in the suburbs, it's a good place to raise a family as a whole. You see, there are stories of some things, kind of the cultural challenges that we have, where there is some wrestling with some of that, but as a whole, it's not like it's being pushed on us as much as it is in other places. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years it would be because of Illinois' political position as a whole, or Chicago's political position as a whole. But for the time being, it's really a little more balanced than probably some of the other big cities are.
Okay. Going back to what you were saying earlier, it still has that Midwest feel in terms of that family friendliness. And then also there's the Roman Catholic population that steers it in a more friendly direction as well.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
That's my perception of it. And that's, that might be something that being in the suburbs, I don't get as much exposure to as, for example, you would in the city.
Okay. I see.
Probably a little bit more prevalent there.
Tell us a little more about the school situation. Are there good private school options there as well? Lutheran schools or other religious schools that you think are good options?
I think with it being the size of city it is, we have a lot of options for school. Although, as I say that, my wife and I actually homeschool. So
Wonderful.
we would say we're those crazy homeschoolers.
I would not put it that way.
I appreciate that. Well, it's funny because we started doing that just kind of out of the realization that education is the responsibility of the parent, and no matter what the option you choose for that, you have to understand that if you're not doing it, you're delegating it, right? And that's, which is okay. It's not. My wife has a broad education background, so that's something big part of the reason why we feel more comfortable doing it. But it is interesting, as we've been doing it, there have been so many ways where we've been glad that we have, because there's so many things that are being taught in the schools now that are so counter to what we as Christians want to teach our children. So we've been pleased about that. But even with that said, there are a lot of great school options here. There are a lot of Catholic schools. We have a fair number of Lutheran schools. Unfortunately, that is shrinking significantly. Since I've been here, the congregation I served before had a school, and that's closed. And I know of a handful of other schools that have closed as well. Another school in my circuit. They historically had, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 high schools, Lutheran high schools in the Chicagoland area, and that's down to 1 for the time being. That's sound financially, but I think that they have their own struggles, and so there are definitely challenges as far as all that goes. Probably the most successful in terms of attendance and financials and all that are probably the Catholic schools, because of the fairly large Catholic population.
So usually I don't delve into this topic on this podcast, but I'm curious, since you did mention it, what are the state laws in Illinois like for homeschooling? Is it pretty tolerant, pretty favorable? What's it like for you?
It is actually extremely tolerant, and I think it's because I kind of phrase it like it's because of all the old hippies that wanted to homeschool years ago, when they were worried about the opposite things that I'm probably worried about now, And but they are. I mean, it's so, and I don't mean this in a political sense, but just so liberal that you don't have to report that you're homeschooling. I mean, they are very, very hands off at this point with it, which is kind of surprising because you wouldn't necessarily expect that to be the case, but that it is. It's very, very hands off right now.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. If you're listening to this podcast on your device, you already know the power of having audio on the go. And Audible wants to put the books that you would love to listen to right into your ears with a free 30-day trial of their service. You can check out a wide variety of audiobooks, and if you'd like a suggestion, you can get Martin Luther's Table Talk, 7 hours of the wit and wisdom of Martin Luther, on your device for free, but there are a wide variety of options to choose from if you'd rather not listen to Table Talk. So go to audibletrial.com/LutheranCartographer to start your free 30-day trial today.
All right, so let's transition to some fun things. If someone were going to visit your area, what hidden gems or restaurants or activities did you recommend that they check out?
Oh man, there's so much stuff to do here. Some of our favorite things are the Brookfield Zoo. We live very close to the Brookfield Zoo, which is one of the biggest zoos I think in the country. It's great. We have a membership and go numerous times a year. That's always a fun one. We live near something called the Morton Arboretum, which is almost like a nature preserve. There actually are a lot of park preserves nearby, which are really nice too. But the Morton Arboretum is a little bit different. It's a little more organized than some of those in terms of having exhibits and places to go where you can see different kinds of flora and fauna. So that's one of the places we really like to go to. I like beer, and there are a lot of really good craft breweries around, so that's always fun.
Nice. Any particular ones that you'd really recommend or call out as like, oh, you gotta go here?
Well, the Lagunitas one, they've got a brewery in California and then one here, so that's always a fun one because it's kind of a bigger name, but it's local still. So that's a good one. Goose Island has a handful of places to go. That's another one. And then a kind of a micro one that I've gone to recently that I really liked is one called Microphone. They do a lot of imperial stouts and that kind of stuff, which is right up my alley.
Nice. Any restaurants that you'd particularly recommend?
There's so many good places to eat. One of the local chains that's really popular is one called Portillo's, and so I always like that good Chicago fare with Italian beefs and Chicago dogs. There's also a place called Paul's that's just very local. That's a good place. Another place called Mickey's that we enjoy. And then we've got a place here in town called Hillgrove Tap that we really like. But it's nice. It's just down the street, and they've got a nice tap list and some good burgers.
Great.
Oh, and then there's Lou Malnati's. That's our favorite pizza, deep dish Chicago pizza.
What was the name of that again?
Lou Malnati's. Or we call it Lou's.
I think I've heard of their deep dish pizza. They're pretty well known for it, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really good. There's Lou's and Giordano's and Gino's East, and I'm trying to think if there's another place called Pequod's that's got really good. Chicago deep dish pizza is kind of its own thing. It doesn't matter where you get it; it's always good.
Excellent. I want to circle back to something you said earlier in our conversation when I asked about, hey, what do you like about the area? You mentioned the museums. Any particular museums that you'd really recommend checking out?
Well, our favorite is the Museum of Science and Industry, and I think that's one that people all over know about. Especially we've got 4 kids. The oldest is 11, and the youngest is 2, and that age group they love to go there. So that's probably our favorite. But the Field Museum is great. The aquarium is great. The planetarium is great, and we also like the Art Institute downtown. Those are all places we frequent.
So let's go ahead and transition into some advice from you for our listeners. And that first question would be, if someone, let's say they have a job offer in the Chicago area, what would your advice be to them as they're considering whether or not they should move? What kind of person do you think is best suited to that area, or what type of family?
I think that there's such a variety of people here. It's such a big city that almost anybody can probably find a niche where they would fit in. I think that unless you're somebody who doesn't like the city, if you don't like the city, then don't move to Chicago, because it's definitely a city.
It's a city.
So I guess that would be the only type of person that I would probably discourage. But apart from that, I probably would give the same advice that I would give to anybody, and that's when you're looking at moving somewhere, find a connection for your church life. We so often don't think about that in terms of, we could move just because we get a job or whatnot, and we say, well, I'll figure that out when I get there. But I really strongly advise people to figure that out before you get there, because it's such an important thing to be able to have that community that we have in the church. It's the most important thing in terms of what we receive from our Lord there, forgiveness of sins and word and sacrament. But it's also important that we find a place where we have that support that the body of Christ gives, and only the body of Christ can give.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Pastor Mencken once mentioned that he had some parishioners that didn't figure out until they got there that the nearest LCMS church was 2 hours away, which is kind of crazy to think about. But it's certainly, as you said, as that's one of the cornerstone of our life, that's definitely something we should think about beforehand rather than figuring it out afterwards.
As an afterthought, yeah.
Other thoughts you have for people looking to move to Chicago, either places, neighborhoods you'd recommend? Obviously, they should all go to, it's Grace Lutheran, right?
Grace, I was going to say, yeah, definitely you should come to Grace in Western Springs.
That goes without saying.
I think one thing I could say is there are so many good Lutheran churches here. That's something that's nice. Is we really have a lot of good solid congregations in the area, which is nice. And you can find a good confessional congregation, as I would call it, within almost within a half hour from almost anywhere in the Chicagoland area, that's good. I'm trying to think what else. Something else that's kind of cool is that the congregation in which the Articles of Incorporation for the Missouri Synod were signed is here in Chicago. So that's kind of a fun tidbit, and just something that's nice for people to know. But in terms of the more valuable stuff, that's something I think is helpful, is that there are a number of good congregations around the city.
Any other thoughts you have about either contrasting it with previous places you've been, or closing thoughts about the Chicago area?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that I appreciate about the Chicagoland area is that there has been a fairly good Lutheran history here. It's not as though you find a lot of Lutherans necessarily in the population. It's probably pretty consistent with a lot of places. For example, Indianapolis, I feel like is a heavily Catholic and Methodist area, whereas at Chicago, it's a little bit broader. So that's kind of nice. There definitely, I would say there definitely are challenges. The kind of the cultural environment that we have. There's some ways where somewhere like Indianapolis maybe is a little bit easier to live in as a Christian. I wear a collar all the time, something that Pastor Lastman, my vicarage supervisor, I appreciated his advice on that in terms of saying when you wear a collar every day, then people realize there's a Christian presence there. It's funny because here the assumption is always then I'm a priest, which says something, but at least that they realize that there is a presence of clergy, and when I get the opportunity to talk to people, which happens with some regularity, and I get the chance to say, well, I'm actually Lutheran, and maybe that strikes up a conversation or something like that, and it's kind of nice to have that sort of culture here where it's not something where people look at you like you have three eyes because you're wearing a collar or something like that.
As we close the interview, are there any places that you'd like to send our listeners? Any places to follow you online? Definitely link to your church's webpage on our show notes. Is there any other place that you'd like to send people, Twitter or anything like that?
I am woefully inadequate in my online presence, so I would just Grace would probably be it. At some point maybe I'll get on the stick with that kind of thing, but right now I don't have anything like that yet.
Any parting thoughts for our listeners today, Pastor Zickler?
Pray God's blessings to your hearers and to you as you're kind of considering what your future holds and your future in terms of your relationship to the church and where the Lord would guide you and place you for your faith life.
Thank you very much, and God's peace to you, Pastor Zickler.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things we talked about today, check out the show notes at lutherancartographer.com/6. I encourage you to check out the Audible offer for that free audiobook at audibletrial.com/lutherancartographer. Lastly, if you've been enjoying the show, I would appreciate it if you would take the time to rate and review the show on iTunes. That helps this podcast be seen by more people. Please join us next week as we continue to explore the Chicago suburbs. Until then, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk with you soon.